So I'll introduce my colleague from Université de Montréal, Ingrid Hall, who is chairing this panel.
Hi. Then we are gone for the second panel on conservation, and we have some continuity with the former panel as we are talking about Tanzania and Cree, and we have also a different type of work done in Quebec and in Spain. In Spain. So I leave you je ne sais pas si je vais pas finir par parler français ce matin, j'y arrive pas. Okay, I will give the word to you. So you have 10 to 12 minutes, each of you. I have some papers to tell you when you have still 5 minutes left, 2 minutes left, and 1 minute left. As we are late, I will try to be very straight, so I'm seated here. I will be able to give you the paper right now. And then we will have the discussion with Nicole Fenton, and then the period for the question. So I leave the words for Joseph Onilia from the TNRF and Alicia Mori from McGill. The TNRF is a Tanzanian Natural Forum. And Alicia Mori is the student, PhD student at McGill. Master student at McGill. And she's working on governments and social connected and democratic dilemma in Lake Nation wildlife management area.
Thank you. Good morning. Bonjour. ¿Cómo estás? So my colleagues yesterday already gave a very, very good insight and way forward regarding WMAs in Tanzania or community-based wildlife management in Tanzania. So ours really is just to contextualize that and build on what they already shared yesterday. Sorry, technology. Sorry. So I'll just start by sharing the policy background to community-based wildlife management in Tanzania. Our first speaker, our keynote speaker on the first day talked about this process, so this is nothing new to you. Basically, between the 1890s to the post-independence era, we had this protected areas approach, which was more exclusive. It's about zoning of areas and then exclusively managing them for wildlife management, for conservation purposes. Between the 1970s and the 1980s, of course, we all know there was severe poaching. About 50% of the populations of elephants within Tanzania were depleted. So this brought about a rethinking about how conservation is done in Tanzania. And one of the things was to bring communities into the conservation. It was a paradigm shift from the protected area approach and bringing communities into the center of conservation. So this shift started between the late 1980s to early 1990s. For example, in 1998, Tanzania adopted the National Wildlife Policy of Tanzania, which had some 3 key objectives, which is to promote involvement of local communities in wildlife conservation in and outside protected areas, protected networks. Also to integrate wildlife conservation with rural development, because this was still not integrated. And to ensure that wildlife conservation is actually a viable and competing land use in Tanzania. So in 2002, we had regulations that allowed the implementation or the piloting of about 16 what we call wildlife management areas, which increased the community participation in conservation because it was primarily supposed to be led by communities. That was the whole design. And just so you know, these are the different CBWM approaches in Tanzania. We have the outreach programs run by TANAPA, which is the Tanzania National Parks Authority, who is involved. We have a number of villages who are part of this initiative, but most of these are areas which are around the conventional protected areas. Then we have the community development programs under the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. A little bit controversial, I'm sure my colleagues would have a lot to say about that. And then, of course, the wildlife management areas, which are supposed to be mandated under the Wildlife Division. These are some old statistics, Corey, so don't ask me about the 137 villages. So basically, this is a map of the current distribution of WMAs in Tanzania. These are wildlife management areas. And we have some in the northern area, which is which has a lot of high potential in wildlife potential, and a few in the southern area. So this is just to show the differing levels of participation in conservation in these different approaches. You can see the TANAP approach has very low participation and engagement of communities. The NCA also has low, but the WMAs has, in a relative sense, medium level of participation. There are different levels of devolvement of responsibility within these different approaches. There are a number of benefits. If you go through literature about WMAs, there's so many people have cited different number of benefits. But I've zoomed in on these two that actually resonate with me, which are the fact that there's increased participation, well, relative compared to the others, of communities in the conservation process, and that through the WMAs, there are more socioeconomic opportunities for employment, entrepreneurship, and so on and so forth. Of course, there are challenges. One of them is how to sustain the initiative. One of them is, of course, we need to look at how to increase and diversify income opportunities from these wildlife areas. The challenges in terms of technical capacity, human technical capacity, the basics like management, general business know-how, and also understanding the policy framework and the laws and regulations around that. I'll just skip that. And of course, this is essential, it's quite essential to this process, the need to streamline policy and guidelines for community-based wildlife management in Tanzania, including WMAs and all the other approaches, because there's a lot of contradictions, conflicts that arise because of the different policies that come into play. My colleague will talk a little bit about that, and I'll sum that up when I'm giving my recommendations. We also need effective monitoring. At the moment, it's more top-down. Evaluation and coordination needs to be more centralized and community-driven. So with that, I'll just hand over to Alicia. Thank you.
Hold on, guys. He'll be back right after me. So hold on. A little shorter. Okay, so I just wanted to take you quickly back to yesterday, where my colleagues Corey Wright and Alicia Morandat were highlighting some of the tensions that have been faced among Maasai communities in the areas that they work. So that was Loliondo and then Duimet Wildlife Management Area. And if you recall, these areas are predominantly populated by the pastoralist Maasai, and these communities have been facing ongoing land disputes as access to their traditional grazing lands are continually being threatened. And so with this in mind, I'm going to take you to another area in northern Tanzania, where 32 villages are now currently in the process of establishing what will be called the Lake Natron Wildlife Management Area. And so this area is said to host some of Africa's richest biodiversity, well-known flora and fauna, and has been identified as a very important conservation area in Tanzania. Just which button do I press? There we go. So these are the villages that are included in this wildlife management area. And they have been approached by conservation NGOs and related government officials and told about the benefits of creating this area. And for the last few years, locals have been working with these NGOs and government players in creating land use plans and resource zone management plans and the related land regulations that are included with these. And it should be noted that from the beginning of this process, the Maasai in this area have been very hesitant about becoming involved in establishing the conservation areas. Because again, they are actually neighbors to the Loliondo area, and they've heard about these disputes and thought that accepting the WMA would result in similar processes of land dispossession. So in response to these concerns, the locals have been constantly reassured by the NGO partners and the respective government officials that there will be no prohibition of grazing in the conservation areas. So today, when you speak to a Maasai in this area, they will tell you that the conservation area is not just for wildlife, but it will be a place where wildlife and livestock graze together and they mix together. But the problem that we're beginning to see is that there's some conflict between the wildlife division and the Maasai communities when deciding how to regulate grazing in these areas. In a stakeholder meeting in December 2013, it was quite clear that the Wildlife Division was trying to push the communities to agree to more regulatory measures of grazing in the conservation zones. So if you look at this map, which is a draft of the zoning plan, you can see the light green areas are called core conservation areas. And essentially within the document, there's a paragraph that clarified that these areas would not permit grazing. This is, again, a draft, and we haven't actually seen the final outcome of this document yet. It has not yet been made public, but we are unsure as to what that will reveal, and we're waiting in anticipation to see what the results will be. But when this was presented, locals, of course, outrightly refused to agree with this separation, and they maintain that they will only be involved in this process if their grazing rights are protected. So yeah, it's yet to be seen whether or not the outcome of these kind of plans and land regulations will represent the decisions made by the community, or if we will continue to see the government rejecting the Maasai's integrative approach to grazing and conservation of land. So again, as my colleague Corey said yesterday, this move towards co-governance or co-management in Tanzania could potentially be a dangerous game that the local communities now have to play in, and they'll have to be strategic when interacting with the state and determining or seeing the outcomes of these plans. So considering this, I'd just like to invite my colleague back up, and he would like to share some of the recommendations that he has.
Thank you, Alicia. So the number of recommendations that have come up over the last few years, because there have been assessments of WMAs in Tanzania. But we have a separate initiative, research project initiative, called the PIMA. And out of that, we've actually come up with about 9 different recommendations, but I'll just zoom in on a few which are relevant to this particular case. The first one is that, of course, devolution is the responsibility of the wildlife management communities, or the communities in which these wildlife management areas are found. And so there's a need to actually invest in good business models for sustaining these initiatives, but also capacity building has to be part of this process. And like I said earlier, policy streamlining has to also be. And then also, there's so many different actors involved in the WMA process. In Tanzania, it's actually project-driven. There are big INGOs using donor funds who actually lead the process in Tanzania, or have been leading the process in Tanzania. So this needs to change. And even the level of coordination between these different institutions has not been productive. I think it's been counterproductive. To me, I find promoting transparency in terms of FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, being central to this process. Because one of the problems is that when you refer to the Wildlife Management Regulations 2009, it states that you must point out the benefit sharing modalities for these WMAs, but there's nowhere where it tells you that you have to share with the communities the costs that go into the process of WMAs. So they're not actually that well informed about the cost benefit of actually going into WMAs. They also do not have a choice. I mean, it is in the law that they can actually pull out. A village can decide to pull out of WMA, but enforcing that is a different issue altogether. So one of the things is this needs to be promoted as a central point of WMAs. It has to be a very transparent, open process with clear discussions at different levels. Also, WMAs rules and regulations should be more extensive, and the process of deliberating on things like land use planning, zoning, access to resources both temporarily and spatially needs to be emphasized. Last but not least, the whole issue that Alicia's just been talking about tenure and security of access to grazing. There's a conflict here in the sense that most WMAs, once they're established, their operation falls under the Wildlife Management Act. And in a sense, it's simply put, it's saying that wildlife cannot be in the same place with livestock and people. So that is a problem in itself. This needs to be addressed if we're to move forward, because most of these areas are dryland areas which have pastoralist communities in them. So you cannot exclude them from these pasture lands. Thank you very much. Asante.
Thank you very much, and you are very respectful, so thank you, very organized. So the next speakers are Janelle Baker, who is this time PhD candidate at McGill, and she's working on Cree perspective on wildlife, wild food, and contamination. And she will be talking with Treena Gladue from the Bigstone Cree Nation. So I leave you the micro.
Good morning. I just want to say a few words in my own language. It's been difficult not speaking my language because I'm the one that speaks it here. So I think my mom's tired of me calling her all the time. Nenas kamau na hagat bimguya. Kakioga kanoita. Gibmatsuno. Kakiomga kamamo yatia. Nenas kamun. Nenas kum nawawaste. Kantamuyauta kitaskiwa. Koegemiasen. Kitaskiwa. Dantiga noch tigiuyan. First of all, I'd like to thank the Creator for all the land, and to thank everybody, and to thank the Atikamekw First Nation in inviting us into their traditional territory. From our traditional territory to yours, thank you. It's a great honor. Hey.
Thank you, Treena. Treena and I co-authored this presentation, but with the agreement that she would give this beautiful introduction, and then I would speak now with the invitation to her to interject any time that she wants to correct or add anything. We just wanted to provide a little background on Bigstone Cree Nation. Thank you. It's I think the largest First Nation in Alberta population-wise, no?
Second largest.
Second largest. And it's in the province of Alberta in northeastern Alberta in Canada. This is a map of the oil sands deposits in the region, and the largest and most famous oil sands deposit, the Athabasca oil sands, are in the heart of Bigstone Cree traditional territory. But I'd just like to point out that there are two others, the Cold Lake oil sands and the Peace River oil sands area. And the area that most people have heard about is along the Athabasca River, which is the surface mineable area. You can see the province of Alberta in their map has said only 4% of that area has been mined. But you can see there's a much larger area that is being extracted in other ways than open pit mining, sort of an in situ process. This is a map of Bigstone Cree's traditional territory. You can see the Athabasca River is the southeastern border, and it goes as far north as the Birch Mountains Provincial Protected Area. This is a map that Treena brought along of all of the current oil and gas activity in their traditional territory. So it's the same map, but with all of these dots show current developments on their land. So Bigstone Cree Nation is in the Treaty 8 region. They're signatories to the Treaty 8, which was an agreement that was signed in 1899 between Queen Victoria and First Nations chiefs. It has many promises. including that First Nations have rights to use Crown or public lands for their traditional uses and practices. And it's protected under Section 35 of the Constitution Act. This is a map of Treaty 8. It's a very large treaty area. This is just a little tidbit from the Commissioner's report when they were writing back to the government and signing Treaty 8. And they said that their chief difficulty was the apprehension that the hunting and fishing privileges were to be curtailed. So this was the apprehension of the First Nations chiefs. And the Commissioner said, we assured them that the treaty would not lead to any forced interference in their mode of life. Another interesting thing that Treena and I argue about Treaty 8 is that the other agreements or treaties signed in the province of Alberta or the area were signed because of the Western advancement of settlers. But Bigstone Cree territory, Treaty 8 territory, is mostly boreal forest, and so people really didn't anticipate settlers coming to the area. And so it was signed very late compared to the other treaties. But when the treaty commissioners were in the region, they wrote back to the government and they said, the tar, whatever it may be otherwise, is a fuel and burned in our campfires like coal. That this region is stored with a substance of great economic value is beyond all doubt. And when the hour of development comes, it will, I believe, prove to be one of the wonders of northern Canada. This was in the late 1800s. So we believe that this was their motivation for signing treaty, was so they could gain access to the oil sands. So this, through a series of court cases, this has led to the federal and provincial government having the duty to consult First Nations regarding the impact of proposed projects on public lands to First Nations treaty rights to harvest. So the government has, the provincial and federal governments have come up with a series of guidelines. And one of the most interesting things to point out is that the guidelines transfer the duty to consult to what they call as third parties. So the companies are paying First Nations and consulting them and asking them to do assessments of the potential impacts of the projects on their territories. So First Nations are inundated with requests from companies to do these assessments. And Bigstone Cree Nation has a government industry relations office that deals with all of these technicalities. Treena is the traditional land use coordinator in the office. So they have 5 staff members, 5 full-time environmental monitors working for them. They have many knowledge holders and elders, trappers that they go to regarding different areas they need to look at. But their main focus is to preserve and protect as much of their territory as they can. But you know, come and talk to Treena and I later. We could speak for hours about the many problems with traditional land use as consultation. So the traditional land use assessments are rolled into the environmental impact assessment process. And just yesterday, Treena leaned over to me and said, "We're just recording what the companies are going to destroy." And so we said that the First Nations are damned if you do, and damned if you don't, meaning that if a First Nation decides to engage in the traditional land use process and the consultation process, a company provides money, the First Nation goes out, creates a report, the company extracts little tidbits from the report that they want to respond to and ignore most of it, and then they equate this act of accepting money and doing the assessment as with permission for the project to go ahead. Now, but if you don't, if the First Nation decides not to participate in this process, it's in these consultation guidelines that the company can just go ahead. They just need to prove that they attempted to consult. And they do this, you know, they'll keep track of every phone call and email that they make. So Bigstone Cree Nation came up with their own consultation policy, which is we, the Bigstone Cree Nation, have the right and responsibility to address issues regarding natural resource exploitation within our traditional lands and assert that any activity in the Bigstone Cree Nation territory requires consultation with respect to impacts on our treaty and inherent rights as confirmed in Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982. This is a picture of an oil spill on Bigstone Cree traditional territory. So Bigstone Cree Nation has adopted this policy as a result of the growing concern about the extent of development in their territory and the pervasive and lasting impact of those developments on their traditional way of life and on their constitutionally protected rights. So they're saying that Crown consultation policies have failed to protect their traditional way of life, and they believe without taking action on our own initiative, their way of life will become impossible. So we're going to quickly I'll just show a few pictures of some of their monitors out on the land. This, often when doing traditional land use assessments, it means actually being on the land and harvesting or talking to harvesters. This is Treena's dad cleaning some fish. Just some more pictures that the environmental monitors have taken. I couldn't resist throwing in a picture of a lynx there. So Bigstone Cree Nation has a series of strategies outside of traditional land use assessments for sort of dealing with the impacts of oil on their land. And one is the Kituscano tours and demonstrations. They've had a series of peaceful rallies where they have stopped traffic for 2 hours, and they're present at many activities, and they're just informing the workers who are in the territory that this is their territory. A lot of workers come from all over the world to work in the oil sands region. They don't really even know who Bigstone Cree Nation is. They've also done these tours of forestry, oil, and gas activity. So, of course, there's way too many facilities, activities to visit all of them, but they just physically drive around and check out with whatever community members, chief and council want to go. They go around and look at what's happening, and it really freaks out the companies. They also have a strategy and a growing environmental monitoring program. They have this organization named Eco-Canada has a building environmental Aboriginal human resources training. It's an environmental monitoring program on reserve. And they've had 4 different years of about 20 graduates. So thank you. And they also have asked me, we're working together on some food contaminants studies and research. So I just wanted to show a couple reasons why they might be concerned about food contaminant. Here's an oil spill on their territory, another one near a beaver house. And this next picture is the actual reason that they contacted me to start talking about gaining funds. So an elder brought this duck in, it's covered in oil. They didn't know who to trust to have it tested or looked at. So we applied for funding, and they're doing, the community-based monitors are out right now probably collecting, actually it's the weekend so they're not, but they're collecting samples that we're sending in for testing. Another oily duck that was brought in. And I have to warn you, the next 2 pictures are a little graphic. And I can barely look at them, so I'm just warning you. But this is a deformed fish from Sandy Lake that was brought in, the one on top. Here's another angle of the fish. I just can't even look at it. And you can see that the fish underneath it has cysts. And you hear people talking about this sort of thing a lot in the region in the water. Also in the Athabasca River, these fishes with these bizarre cysts and that are slimy. And so just to conclude, Bigstone Cree Nation believes that there's a real lack of respect and reciprocity, that companies and government are not currently acknowledging Bigstone Cree Nation's recommendations and concerns or their sovereignty as a nation.
Thank you very much, Janelle. And I invite you, if you want to know a little bit about the berries, to look at the poster that Janelle has done here in that corner.
Sorry. The poster is a similar study with another First Nation in the oil sands region in Fort McKay.
So we are now listening to Sabrina Doyon. She is professor of anthropology in the department of the University of Laval, and she will talk to us about conservation environnementale, production alimentaire vers une subsistance alternative.
Bonjour tout le monde, je suis contente d'être ici avec vous et de pouvoir vous parler en français. Je remercie CICADA pour l'invitation et je remercie également CICADA d'avoir permis cette traduction simultanée. Je pense que c'est très important et c'est très apprécié. Aujourd'hui, je vais vous parler d'un projet de recherche que je dirige avec des collègues, 3 collègues, et qui permet aussi de travailler avec 7 étudiants gradués. C'est un projet de recherche qui s'intéresse justement aux formes alternatives d'être au monde. Alors, j'espère que ça pourra vous rejoindre malgré qu'il n'y ait pas de communauté autochtone dans mon projet. Alors, Barbara est architecte. Elle a travaillé dans ce domaine pendant 20 ans avant de reprendre la terre de ses beaux-parents pour y produire du vin écologique. Un produit encore plus bio que le vin biologique, car en plus de ne contenir aucun additif, les raisins sont cultivés sans intrants. Sur les 5 hectares de vignes en culture, Barbara produit 4000 bouteilles par année, ce qui constitue une très petite production. Les terres qu'elle possède avec son conjoint, qui est pompier, sont cernées par un champ de tir de l'armée espagnole et, alors qu'elle désherbe ses vignes, elle enregistre le son produit par les exercices militaires avec son iPhone afin de documenter cette situation qu'elle juge inacceptable. Elle transmet ces enregistrements à l'organisation environnementaliste IAEDEN afin de constituer un dossier pour dénoncer cette situation et la changer. Entre les vignes cultivées avec la technique en vase, on peut parfois apercevoir des tortues méditerranéennes, une espèce en voie d'extinction qui est en repeuplement sur ces terres, en collaboration avec le Centre de reproduction des tortues de l'Albera. Barbara peut accueillir ces reptiles et en favoriser la reproduction car elle ne retourne pas le sol dans sa pratique agricole, ce qui protège les œufs des locataires temporaires identifiés par une puce GPS. Barbara veut pouvoir vivre de sa production, mais elle ne cherche pas l'enrichissement. Elle veut d'abord maintenir une production écologique sans aucun produit ajouté et elle souhaite rester à l'écart des mécanismes de marchandisation, de commercialisation et de réglementation de la région qui s'établissent notamment par la dénomination d'origine du vin de l'Impurda. Elle participe néanmoins à certains concours qui lui permettent d'avoir une plus grande visibilité car les habitants de son village et de la région immédiate n'achètent pas ses produits. Francis et Marie-André ont acheté la ferme Enchantée il y a quelques années. Elle était déjà certifiée bio et ils pratiquent maintenant la permaculture. Ils utilisent des plantes indigènes et vivaces, dont le houblon, et ils élèvent des animaux en mettant à profit un système de rotation selon la technique salatine. Leur projet en est un d'autosuffisance et de résilience à la consommation des produits pétroliers, car il y a un projet de pipeline dans notre région. Le projet en est un, oui, voilà. Alors, afin d'en arriver à cette autosuffisance, ils insistent sur l'importance de cultiver des plantes endémiques et ancestrales. Marie-André et Francis ont fait le choix conscient de limiter leur clientèle et de distribuer leurs produits à un niveau local. En fait, au fil du temps, ils se sont aperçus que leur profit était plus intéressant lorsqu'ils limitaient leur production pour se concentrer sur une clientèle limitée, mais impliquée. À la cabotine saveur indigène, on cultive des champignons et des produits forestiers. Nadia, originaire de Montréal, a choisi de quitter son travail de biologiste pour créer sa petite entreprise et ne pas être assise au bureau toute la journée. Elle cueille différents produits de la forêt, queue de quenouille, tête de violon, boutons de marguerite, en plus des champignons qu'elle transforme dans son déshydrateur, ses séchoirs ou dans des petits pots pour lesquels elle a gagné un prix féministe d'entrepreneuriat. Féminin. Elle cueille ses produits sur des terres privées et publiques et elle souhaite demeurer à petite échelle, tant dans la taille de l'entreprise que dans la distribution. Elle veut intégrer son entreprise à la communauté, vendre ses produits aux familles et éviter le réseau des grands restaurants et de la consommation de luxe pour plutôt sensibiliser les habitants de la région à cette richesse et la protéger. En ce sens, elle et sa famille militent aussi contre l'implantation d'un projet de pipeline dans la région. Oui. Et donc, dans cette lutte contre un projet de pipeline dans la région, et elle affiche publiquement son opposition à cet égard dans des affiches plantées sur leur terrain. Pera et Nandu sont 2 frères issus d'une famille de pêcheurs. Ils ont hérité de la pêche au chalut de leur père et après 7 ans à y travailler dans le village de Yansa, ils ont décidé de transformer radicalement leurs activités. Ils ont vendu leur gros bateau pour en acheter un plus petit de pêche artisanale sur lequel ils utilisent des agrès qu'utilisaient leurs familles avant le boom de l'industrialisation des années 70. Ils ont également acheté une poissonnerie. Ils ont voulu réduire l'emprise de leurs activités pour avoir une pratique à échelle plus humaine qui leur permette de sentir et de comprendre la nature et la mer. Ils sont aussi en faveur de la transformation des pratiques de pêche et ils font participer des touristes à leurs embarqués lors de journées qui se concluent par la consommation d'un repas. Cette pratique permettrait, selon eux, de protéger la ressource car l'argent qu'apportent les touristes leur permet de moins pêcher et ils tentent ainsi de convaincre leurs collègues de la cofraderie de se convertir à cette pratique et à ce raisonnement économique, ce qui n'est pas encore gagné. Ces cas ont été étudiés dans le cadre d'une recherche en cours sur les projets alternatifs et la conservation environnementale des espaces côtiers au Québec et en Catalogne. Ils ne sont que 4 exemples parmi plus de 400 que nous y avons recensés. Ils ont été identifiés en fonction de leur pratique d'une activité d'utilisation et de mise en valeur de la nature qui mise sur la conservation environnementale et qui est alternative aux productions conventionnelles. Nous avons ethnographié les caractéristiques de ces projets leur position face au système économique global et local, leur rapport à la nature, à la conservation environnementale et à leur région. Ces 4 projets présentés font partie d'un des 3 groupes que l'analyse préliminaire a identifiés, soit les indépendants. En les examinant, on constate des tensions et des paradoxes propres à ce monde alternatif et écologique indépendant. Leur examen nous guide vers une compréhension des rapports spatiaux et de pouvoir qu'ils sous-tendent. Cette compréhension éclaire la question des pratiques alternatives qui demeurent encore vastes. Alternatifs, environnementalistes, écologiques, utopistes, non économiques, transitionnistes, du bien-vivre, de la décroissance, comment les nommer. Donc, elle nous éclaire sur les enjeux de pouvoir qu'elles supposent et leur portée pour la conservation. 3 dimensions rejoignent chacun de ces projets et les nourrissent. Ils nous permettent donc de faire un pas de côté pour réfléchir à la conservation d'une autre façon. La protection et la conservation de la nature est le premier. Ça prend forme par des gestes concrets inscrits dans leurs actions quotidiennes ainsi que par la participation à des luttes environnementales et des mouvements environnementalistes. Ça, c'est les projets au Québec. Des mouvements environnementalistes. Leur préoccupation est donc d'aggrader la nature ou de ne pas contribuer à la détériorer par des pratiques respectueuses ou par la permaculture, en faisant l'éducation environnementale, des ateliers, de l'agrotourisme. Le deuxième aspect est que ces projets sont tous nouveaux. Ils ont émergé dans les années 2000, parfois même pendant la crise économique de 2007. Ils sont portés par des néo-ruraux ou dans un processus de retour à la terre. Et ils sont aussi très politisés. Leurs principes s'ancrent dans des discours globaux sur l'alternative économique et écologique. Ils font partie de liens transnationaux par les médias sociaux et des réseaux de woofers, par exemple. Ils insistent aussi sur l'importance de leur région et misent la valorisation du local à tout prix. Ils veulent distribuer au niveau local et ils veulent que les retombées de leurs activités soient locales. Ils apprécient vivre à l'extérieur des grands centres. Ces 3 aspects sont au cœur de leurs préoccupations et de leurs pratiques, mais ils sont en tension avec des caractéristiques structurelles, économiques, politiques et culturelles qui teintent leurs rapports socio-environnementaux. Je vous en présente également 3. Donc, le premier, c'est celui de la conservation et de la nature patrimonialisée. Alors, les politiques de patrimonialisation de la nature et de la culture mettent en valeur un patrimoine qui n'est pas celui des indépendants. Ils souhaitent mettre en avant en se construisant une image de la région unifiée et uniforme qui ne correspond pas à leurs aspirations et à leurs valeurs. Les dénominations d'origine et autres indications régionales sont des outils commerciaux qui coûtent cher. Ils sont considérés comme un moindre mal pour protéger, mais ce n'est pas ce qu'ils prendraient eux comme moyen. Les autres outils d'écotourisme, selon eux, créent des lieux qui sont factices, qui n'existent pas en réalité et qui les rendent inconfortables parce que ça ne les implique pas à moins d'avoir beaucoup d'argent et ça crée des catégories qui les excluent. Il y a là une normativité de ces outils qui nuisent à leur pratique. Le deuxième aspect est la question de la solidarité globale, mais de la dépendance locale. Donc, l'autonomie, l'autosuffisance, la souveraineté alimentaire et naturelle est au cœur de leur pratique. Cependant, ces indépendants se voient obligés de demander des aides des gouvernements pour faire fonctionner leurs projets, où ils doivent louer des terres à des habitants locaux qui ne veulent plus pratiquer l'agriculture ou la viticulture, mais qui ne souhaitent pas non plus vendre leurs terres, car qui sait, un boom immobilier peut toujours être à notre portée. Donc, l'accès à la terre et aux moyens de production n'est pas facilité par les structures de propriété foncière et les difficultés du milieu rural ne permettent pas, par exemple, pour un agriculteur, de prendre sa retraite sans une vente lucrative de ses terres. Donc, les seuls qui sont dans une perspective plus intéressante sont bien sûr ceux qui sont héritiers. Enfin, le dernier aspect avant la conclusion, c'est la question du localisme et paradoxalement de l'isolement. Donc, les indépendants veulent s'ancrer dans toutes leurs dimensions de leurs projets dans la région. Toutefois, les populations des régions ne sont pas ouvertes à ces projets et ils ne consomment pas les produits qui sont issus de ces initiatives. Plusieurs disent que les habitants sont fermés et que c'est beaucoup mieux, par exemple, en France ou au Nouveau-Brunswick pour avoir des débouchés de leurs produits. Paradoxalement. Donc, ils doivent d'ailleurs se résigner à vendre dans des marchés alternatifs biologiques en ligne, en ville, où ils apportent des paniers. Ils souhaiteraient plutôt avoir plus d'accessibilité. Donc, on peut conclure par ici, vous avez des images de pêche à l'anguille aussi qui se pratiquent dans le fleuve Saint-Laurent. Et oui, il y a une démarche là, de patrimonialisation. Donc, les activités de subsistance alternatives qui aggradent la nature et l'écologie politique d'une région par des actions hétérogènes, multiples et riches sont contingentes de lieux et de rapports à l'espace. Par exemple, on peut constater l'importance d'avoir un lien au patrimoine, un lien historique avec le territoire, l'importance de la transmission transgénérationnelle, l'importance des liens entre la terre et la mer pour une économie politique de la côte qui contourne l'isolement, l'importance des liens qui pourraient exister physiquement entre les participants et non pas seulement des liens électroniques, comme c'est le cas actuellement, et l'importance des communications. Donc, dans un contexte où l'économie régionale est organisée par l'État et les industries et est peu perméable à ces tentatives de justice socio-économique et environnementale. Donc, tout cela nous offre, si vous voulez, une autre perspective sur la conservation qui est localisée, incarnée et différente de celle proposée par les programmes d'aires protégées, de parcs et de réserves naturelles que j'ai par ailleurs étudiés dans d'autres projets au Mexique et à Cuba. Donc, je pense que ces projets d'aires protégées, de réserves naturelles font plusieurs choses, produisent plusieurs aspects dans la vie concrète des gens, mais je ne suis pas certaine qu'elles conservent selon mes analyses. Alors, ce projet-là nous permet peut-être d'explorer, en faisant un pas de côté, d'essayer de voir comment une subsistance alternative permet de re-questionner la conservation en réfléchissant hors de ces cadres qui existent déjà, mais qui sont par ailleurs très éclairants, comme on l'a vu ici dans la conférence, et donc de considérer des aspects plus organiques du lien au territoire, même dans des communautés qui ne sont pas autochtones, et qui sont à la fois complexes et radicaux. Merci.
Thank you, Sabrina, and especially because you have opened the conversation and I think in some way prepared the intervention of for the comments. So I leave the micro for Nicole Fenton, and we will also cross perspectives because for the first panel we had the opinion of José Hailwin, which is for citizenship in Latin America, and we're speaking from his own perspective, and now we have the opinion of someone working in forestry, which is some kind of other insight. I leave you the micro.
Thank you. Yes, I'm at Université de Québec on Abitibi-Témiscamingue, which is one of the two Universités de Québec, which is actually based in a region rather than in a city, with Outaouais, which is actually based in Gatineau, so I don't think it counts quite so much. So we're a rural university based on resource extraction, but the most important thing is we're very integrated with our community. We have 2 main campuses and 4 centers in a region that has a population of only 140,000. Bon, c'est assez sur moi. Notre colloque a ouvert vendredi soir avec une présentation très intéressante qui montrait comment la conservation était en train de changer. Il y avait un shift. Am I allowed to change languages, or does that bother you? So there was a shift of including not just the biology, but the people in our perspective of conservation. And I think in this very interesting panel, we've had 3 presentations that have shown us 2 ways, or 3 ways that things have been shifting. If we start first in Africa, we can see, if I understood correctly, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, that the government is at least making small steps towards shifting to including local communities. Is it a government-driven process? Okay, good, I did understand. So the government is shifting the process to include potentially, if they live up to their promises, the perceptions and the needs of the local communities. And that's kind of interesting because if we contrast that to our 2 other presentations where it is, the government seems to be hindering the process rather than facilitating it. Because if we move to Alberta, we can see it is the community that is no longer accepting the process that is being forced on it and to just document what is going to be destroyed and want to take things into their own hand, or shifting conservation and pushing the process and the players to move to a different level and to consider their point of view. And I think that's really interesting. And then we had our 3rd presentation, puis là je vais parler en français, qui nous ramène à l'idée d'un changement individuel au niveau des individus, puis ça nous ramène encore une fois à la présentation de vendredi soir, que c'est pas juste un processus qui inclut les Premières Nations, les communautés indigènes, mais aussi les communautés locales, puis les gens qui vivent sur la terre, puis vivent de la terre. Alors, c'est les individus qui prennent un pas de côté, si je peux prendre vos mots, puis changent leur perspective de la conservation, puis comment vivre sur la terre. So I think with these 3 presentations, we've had 3 really interesting examples of how conservation can shift to include individuals and communities on different continents and with different drivers. So, if I can open up that for questions. Y a-t-il des questions?
Okay, thank you. You have been very brief. Thank you for leaving time for the question, because I think we have a quarter to make questions. Who have questions? Maybe we take 2 or 3 and then you will be answering, just like before. I have seen the first hand raised, first round.
Thank you very much. I think from my colleagues from Tanzania, they have shown that idea that government is interested in giving power to the people with certain limitation. With the other presentations, here in the north, I think I'm seeing a number of things which I thought maybe I should share quickly. One is the whole idea of an aspiration for transformation. And that's a very fundamental and very important aspect, which is a big challenge to the group, the educated, the researchers, the learned, the professors, the people with the computer and the pen, more so than the fellow with a stick and kettle on the ground. I think for me, I see this as a fundamental challenge for many of us here who are scholars. It's a serious issue to me, and one that I would like the group to relook. Second thing is that the minute you talk about transformation and accept that, is the minute you have got to begin to talk about repositioning, which I think is the second element of great importance that I see as being a challenge. Again, not to the fellow with cattle or fish here in the north, in the rivers, but to the one who is learned. And repositioning, therefore, for me, is a very important term that I think I need us to interrogate a little bit. And re-engineering, therefore, is another one, the models that you're proposing. So the third term for me would be, how then do you re-engineer this so that it works on the ground without sending confusing signals to those in the north and those in the south who are ready for that. And finally is the issue of education for transformation. Because I heard, even from the last presentation, that shifting towards through participation, and shifting towards giving the power. That is the whole model. Is a big aspiration, but that cannot happen if we don't do those few things that I have just mentioned. And I think it is a difficulty of our institution as they are today to transform the knowledge, to transform those aspects, to re-engineer, to reposition, and finally to hand over the stick of power to the people. My biggest worry, even in my own government, from what Joseph and others have presented, is the willingness of the government to really hand over the power to the people. And I think this is a disease, a difficulty, and a challenge of not only governments, but more importantly, the people who are researching and writing these realities. You are not really giving people the chance to reread their own history and rewrite their own reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a second question here.
Over here as well.
Yes, there are two. You already have the micro, so excuse me, maybe we are listening to you.
Thank you. My question is actually for Treena and Janelle. I used to teach environmental assessment in 2 First Nations in BC. I used to go around the province teaching them how to get more involved, how to use the process to serve themselves. And one of the things that we always encouraged was that you write your own report to the government, and that you publish your own report, and that you do this on your own. And I know you only had 10 minutes, but that's my question to you, is do you actually do that? Because I think that Tooth with the Kinder Morgan project really did an excellent job of showing that you can bring your own expertise to the table in your concerns.
Can you hear me? When we did the bear training program, we had to do our own study, and we have 2 beautiful lakes, the North and South Wabasca Lake, and the North Wabasca Lake is more accessible. Lots of people go fishing, whatever. But South Wabasca Lake is a little bit more shallower, and not very many people go on there. But it's our water resource lake. And so when we're doing the program, we realized that nobody's ever done a study on that lake. And so there was 12 of us in the group, and we all had a task, and what ways can we do a study on the lake. And we put a book together regarding our study, and I think that was the beginning of, because that following summer, well, that spring, the government actually came into our community and did a walleye study. So that was the beginning of studying the water in our community.
Do you publish, you were talking about the relationship between you and oil companies, and you having to use their studies, and then they talk about they publish their reports.
We make our own studies. A lot of times they try and push environmental companies to do the studies for us, and we tag along. Mm-hmm. And my voice is very strong in the meetings. And it was always no. This is our land, and this is our territory. We do the study, or we're not going to agree with anything that you say. And so far it's been working, but now they come back because we have little small companies in our nation that work under Bigstone, and they work for the industry. So they come back at us and say, well, if you're not going to do this study, we're not going to hire this company. That's happening right now. So right now we're on a standstill with them. not very much is happening because we're starting to say no. We used to not knowingly, freely giving information to them, not knowingly. But now we have good people like Janelle and another lady that I use to do our research or to read the studies that the companies do. So they come back and tell us, well, this is what's happening, this is what they're doing, this is what you guys maybe should do. And luckily, our leadership, our chief and council, have been backing us up quite a bit. So it's new. It's very new right now.
If I can just quickly add something. The issue around publishing studies in the EIA and the conflict, the current conflict Treena is talking about, is that one of the companies that wants to do a traditional land use assessment, or wants her office to do one, wants a really strict confidentiality or information sharing agreement where the company will be able to have full access to anything they write in their report and use it in the future. And so the community's saying no. And that's where they're stalled. And like she's saying, then the company starts to bully and say they won't hire local companies unless they sign these agreements. So the problem in the environmental impact assessment process and the publishing of the public, like these documents becoming public, is that the community often doesn't want their traditional knowledge, their moose hunting sites, their berry patches, medicine sites made public. And so there's a lot of push and pull and conflict. And then sometimes the community or the companies will assume that the community doesn't have any of that knowledge because they don't want it to be made public, you know, and so they're still, I think, really struggling with that process.
We'll talk more later.
Thank you. So we'll take the two other questions, and then afterwards we'll let you answer, all of you. There was the first intervention about Tanzania, and more specifically the other one. We take the two other questions, and then we go back to the round. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for the whole presentation. My questions, director of the team from Tanzania. I'm wondering 2 points. One is to do with conflict and dispute resolution in terms of the institutional arrangement. There is no doubt what is being implemented are likely to raise a lot of conflict, and maybe conflict between the government agency and the community in terms of creation of these protected areas. In the event the community is disadvantaged, where do they go? I mean, what be then who is there to adjudicate any disputes or any misunderstanding? So that's my first question. The second question, your opinion in relation to creation of these protected areas in what have been presented yesterday by Philip Hassan on Kenya, that in reality there is really not much in terms of benefit. What is there really basically land loss, if you like. So you have this creation of these protected areas with the expectation that you are going to gain economically in terms of dollars, in terms of Tanzania currency. But presentation by Osano yesterday in the Kenyan case, that's not true. And I'm not sure, what's your opinion in using that study in Kenya to inform decision making in Tanzania? Thank you.
Okay, so another question here, and then we'll let you answer, and we'll take a second round of questions.
Gracias. Mi nombre es Jorge Nahuel, pertenezco a la Confederación Mapuche de Neuquén, al sur de Argentina. Nosotros como organización y como pueblo mapuche tenemos dos escenarios fundamentales donde estamos trabajando. Por un lado, lo relacionado a áreas protegidas, donde estamos llevando adelante una política de comanejo con el organismo que administra áreas protegidas. Con ese organismo estamos llevando adelante un proceso de comanejo insatisfactorio a la fecha, porque no terminamos de ejercer plenamente el derecho al control territorial, y por eso estamos avanzando hacia procesos de gobernanza, que también es otro concepto que hemos ganado y que hemos instalado dentro del debate del mundo conservacionista. La gobernanza entendida como el autogobierno, el derecho a la libre determinación que tenemos como pueblos preexistentes. Y el otro escenario importante tiene que ver con el descubrimiento de una enorme veta petrolera a enormes profundidades y que solamente es posible explotarlo a través del fracking, del método de fractura hidráulica. Un tema también que está generando muchísima alarma en la región porque está aplicándose, violando todo tipo de normas y todo tipo de derechos por la urgencia que hay de lograr autonomía energética. Una tecnología que está absolutamente comprobado que no da garantías de que no vaya a afectar las napas acuáticas, que ha sido prohibido en algunos países, pero que sin embargo allí se está aplicando de la mano de una de las empresas petroleras más desprestigiadas del mundo, que es Chevron, que tiene una enorme deuda ambiental con el Estado ecuatoriano, pero que sin embargo aquí entró con toda una serie de prebendas y de favores, producto de el poderío que tiene esta multinacional petrolera. Ahora nosotros, los pueblos indígenas del continente, por lo menos del sur, chocamos contra un principio que es que el recurso del subsuelo es propiedad del Estado. Por lo tanto, el Estado se toma atribuciones bajo supuesta urgencia o interés nacional y arrasa con vida, arrasa con cultura, arrasa con ambiente. Sin embargo, teníamos la idea de que aquí en Canadá, entre paréntesis, una de las empresas que ha generado enorme destrozo allá en la región mapuche es Alberta Energy, ¿no? Una empresa local de aquí de este país. Ni hablar de las mineras también con capitales canadienses que llegan a nuestro territorio. El pueblo mapuche está sobre la cordillera de los Andes y toda la cordillera de los Andes es una enorme veta minera que está siendo también arrasada, ¿no? A lo que iba era que nosotros teníamos la idea de que aquí en Canadá, y particularmente los Cree, por la fuerza, por la fortaleza que tienen organizativa y política, tenían de alguna manera garantizada o controlada el ingreso de pronto del abuso, de la impunidad de una petrolera. Por lo visto no es así, y eso porque a diferencia del petróleo en manos del Estado y tomándose facultades y arrasando con vida y cultura, entendíamos que aquí en Canadá el recurso tiene potestad del pueblo indígena sobre el recurso del subsuelo. Estas imágenes de contaminación, que son lo más normal y común allí en nuestra región, no pensaba verlo aquí en esta región, ¿no? Y por eso me llama la atención. Y quisiera preguntarle a la hermana, bueno, ¿cuáles han sido los grados de negociación y de experiencia positiva que han tenido en la relación que les toca hoy con este método de extracción petrolera?
Muchas gracias. And then now I leave you the words. I don't know, there were several questions, some about Tanzania specifically, so maybe you can begin.
Yeah, first of all, let me just say I agree with the observations made by Alicia, and also you've raised some very good questions, critical questions. From my recommendations, actually, and looking at what Philip Osano presented yesterday, we're not saying that the WMA model in Tanzania is good. It's not perfect. In fact, there's so many other challenges, there's so many other issues that need to be addressed. One of them being that, on benefit sharing. If you remember, one of the issues I pointed out was that there's no transparency. There needs to be transparency in the process. Because the wildlife policy just requires you to at least point at the financial viability. But it's not, it's not binding enough to force you to actually point out the other costs that the community has to incur when the WMAs are being set up. So it is pretty much in line with what Osano presented yesterday. This is still a challenge, and that's why I said this needs to be central to the process of setting up WMAs. Transparency, open discussion. Because, for example, some communities in Tanzania, for a number of reasons, we've discussed the whole issue of land grabbing. One of the reasons that dryland communities tend to actually go for WMAs is that they feel it's another way of protecting their land, because if it's within a setup that they have been involved in. They have been involved in the land use planning. They have negotiated with investors. They have actually gazetted these areas. They feel that at least it's more secure than if it's just an open grazing land. But the truth is, when it comes to the actual implementation, once you've already set up, because we have 3 categories of land in Tanzania. We have general land, protected areas, and then village land. So this WMA is actually outside protected areas, but then areas, they tend to be adjacent areas to protected areas or areas which are very rich in wildlife potential. So what happens is they have to move their land from the category of village land to a protected area, but under community ownership. Thing is, once that happens, other legislation comes into play. Either wildlife management policies and regulations come into play, because it's now a wildlife area. It's a conservation area now. And in a way, so it's like give and take. It's one of those risks that Corey was pointing at. Because it's like, in a way, they feel one of the reasons that they're told to sign up to this is that this will be better for you. Your land will be safe, and they think that they'll be able to use this for grazing. But once that happens, like the case Alicia pointed out, is that whoever comes in, if it's an investor, they would not want you and your cattle in the area when they're setting up lodges for phototourism. They're interested in hunting and things like that. They want you out of there. So in a way, it's still a challenge. I hope I've touched on both your questions, but about conflict resolution and disputes, this is one of the issues that most of us feel need to be addressed, because there's no clear channel that you can go through. There are so many cases, even the one that Alicia pointed in, they're still in court, they're still litigating some of these issues with the investors in these WMAs. So it's not clear cut, it's still a gray area. For example, as I pointed out earlier, if a WMA or if a village wants to pull out of a WMA, the regulations are supposed to allow you to do that, but it's not as easy as that. Once you've signed up and all these wildlife policies come into play, you just can't say this is no longer a conservation area, we're pulling it back, we're using it for grazing or farming or whatever. It's a whole different story once that happens. So yeah. Alicia?
Do you want to react? There is also the other question about how you document and how you have an impact in front of environmental degradations as they are living in the Mapuche in Chile. I don't know if you want to answer to address this. You want or not?
I was surprised when people were talking these past few days and how similar everything is with the indigenous peoples. I didn't feel so alone. There was only one company that actually worked really well with Bigstone. And they supported us in anything that we decide, and they actually helped us. But the rest, there was no real support. It is, we'll help you, but we need this. That was always the case. It wasn't, what does the First Nation want? What does the First Nation need? It's never a benefit for the First Nation. It's always a benefit for the government or the oil and gas industry. So I'm sorry to say that there's not very much positive that I can give you, because I'd be lying. It's not funny, actually. It's sad. It's very sad that we're being treated this way, no matter where we come from. And I cry for Mother Earth. Thank you.
Okay. Margaret, I have a question. Do we still have some time, or do we have to go for lunch? So, I'm afraid we will have to stop.
Did I answer him?
Excuse me?
Did I answer him?
La respuesta le conviene, quiere ir más allá. ¿Está bien lo que le contestó? You need some micro.
No, está bien. Lo que yo digo es que primero que nos sorprende porque la base, no hay duda que la base de derecho, la base del derecho que tienen los pueblos en Latinoamérica a lo que tiene esta región es muy distinta. Entendemos que hay una fortaleza aquí distinta en la fuente del derecho que lo sostiene. Por eso nos sorprende estar compartiendo una situación tan similar. De paso, claro que el pueblo mapuche está tanto en Chile como en Argentina. Nos divide la frontera estatal, no la cordillera nos unió siempre, pero nos divide la frontera estatal entre Chile y Argentina. Yo pertenezco a la región de Argentina, ahí es donde se ha descubierto esta enorme veta que se denomina vaca muerta, alguna vez van a escuchar porque es una de las vetas más importantes que hay en Sudamérica de reserva petrolera, a enormes profundidades, a 3.000, 4.000, 7.000 metros, y solamente es posible con la técnica de la hidrofractura, que estamos por todos los medios tratando de denunciar el impacto enorme que va a tener sobre el recurso acuífero, y por la cantidad de químicos que se utilizan para poder llegar a generar esa explosión subterránea. Pero el fracking llegó con un enorme aparato propagandístico, no hay forma de que la voz de los pueblos indígenas se escuche, porque es aplastada por todo un aparato mediático que justifica, que lleva propaganda de progreso y desarrollo, que es la gran mentira que invade nuestros territorios. Por eso yo comparto la tristeza de la hermana, porque tenemos un futuro muy sombrío si es que realmente todo lo que estamos preocupados por la alarma planetaria que hoy existe no le ponemos freno a ese tipo de industria tan nefasta para la vida de los pueblos y para el planeta mismo, ¿no? Así que yo comparto también la tristeza y la preocupación de ella por esa situación que estamos compartiendo.
And I want to add something. With the intervention of Sabrina, we have also seen that it's not only a fight and people reacting from the indigenous communities, but also in Spain, here in Quebec. So in very different ways, but I think that it's interesting contrasting information and cases to see how people react and in the context they have. Even if it's not in front of mining industry, for example, but in front of different type of pressures. And well, we didn't have time to hear further on that thematic and on the comparison. I hope we will have time during the lunch, for example. So see you later.